Hi everyone, we're going to be talking about dealing with inclusion, discrimination, and disparities in health, disabilities, and aging social work practice. As we discussed last week, some of this will be a bit of a review and focus on some of the particular issues surrounding this topic, trying to avoid repetition of things we've already covered in class. Just to recap that we have a goal as social work practitioners to promote an inclusive society. And what we mean by that is the recognition of the role and right of everybody to participate in society. That includes recognizing the unique strengths, needs, and interests of everyone, supporting the full participation of diverse members of society through our various activities as social workers, supporting structures, policies, and practices that foster adaptation and inclusion, and that we also want to develop our social work practice so that it can be a tool for helping individuals promote their own interests and to increase their ability to participate independently in society. And in health, disabilities, and aging, we're often talking about some of society's most vulnerable participants, so that has extra meaning for us in this field. Just to review quickly, discrimination is real. There are deeply rooted patterns of oppression and bias that are rooted in society and also in the attitudes of individuals. So again, we bump into this quite frequently in our practice in health, disabilities, and aging, that people with disabilities, people who are ill, people who are aged are all carrying a lot of baggage in our society, have stereotypes attached to them, and systematic, institutionalized patterns of discrimination. So it's important for us as social workers to be prepared to address discrimination where it occurs on all levels, with individuals, with the society or community, with organizations and more developed systems, and then also to address the institutionalized or embedded biases that operate in our culture. So we're going to focus primarily today on disparities and talking about those things that seem to occur in our society that create differences with how individuals are able to access needed services, how they're able to participate in society. So what we mean by disparities are those the impact of those barriers to full participation. And we need to look at the fact that they come in very different forms. Some of them are social, or the patterns between people, and attitudinal in their roots. Some are financial. Some involve accessibility and access. These are all the signs and symptoms of disparities that operate in our culture. People can have very diverse backgrounds and needs, and depending on their socioeconomic status, their racial ethnicity, factors like that, it can seriously impact their ability to get what they need. The way that this tends to show up is on multiple levels as well. So people will describe having personal experiences of being prejudiced against or disempowered or unable to access things. There might also be systematic operations that don't allow certain groups or certain populations to access their services effectively. And again, the societal attitudes and policies that operate. I could think of an example on personal experience level where a Hispanic woman brought her young child to emergency room for follow-up after an accident, and because she wasn't able to speak enough English to communicate her needs, and because they weren't able to provide an interpreter at that time, she went away from the emergency room frustrated, and her child wound up suffering the effects of concussion from the fall and some chronic pain issues later that basically all kind of tied back to this situation where if only we were able to improve access at that moment, her child would have not suffered such disparities in access to health care. On a systematic level, that same incident could have been improved if there had been a system in place for obtaining interpreters either by telephone or in person at all hours of the day and night in the emergency room. So the systemic operations that didn't seem to identify this need, hopefully unintentionally, created a barrier to access. And then there's societal attitudes and policies, which the way that we shape our practices and allocate resources that impacts the way that people can use the system. Going back to the same example, that in order to allow full participation and access, maybe funding needs to be made available, or maybe policy needs to require that hospitals have such practices or resources in place. That would be another way to address that personal level of experience of disparity, for example. One of our readings for this week described that there's a cascade of disparities that can occur. And while in this article they were referring particularly to people with intellectual disabilities, I think it's very fair to recognize that these same patterns or the same cascade occurs for many people that are seen in the practice of social work with health, disabilities, and aging. In I think all of these groups, it's fair to say that there's a higher prevalence of adverse conditions. There's comorbidities, so things that occur in multiple cases with a single individual. So while they might be dealing with an intellectual disability, they might also have a cardiac condition or high blood pressure, things like that. There tends to be inadequate attention to care needs, that things might be grouped into broad categories and not attended to individually, so that people might not get the specialized or individualized care that would really address their needs. There's also a tendency to minimize or not appreciate the importance of training people to deal with their own health and to engage in preventative practices, including routine checkups and things like that. So there's an inadequate focus on health prevention. And then there's also an inadequate access to quality healthcare services, and that can be based on factors that live in the individual. For example, maybe they don't understand the importance of it, or they don't know where to go, or they don't know how to get there, or they don't have resources to transport them there. And it could be on the level of a system which doesn't really have systems for access for people in wheelchairs, for example, or strategies for assisting people with intellectual disabilities to navigate the system, or assumptions that the elderly are cared for in nursing homes or assisted living, and therefore they don't need another system for healthcare. So those kinds of multiple layers of situations can adversely affect access to healthcare and create this cascade of disparities. So you can see how these multiple layers disproportionately impact our population. One thing that we can do as social workers is to really zero in on the factors that contribute to disparities. So another way to think about this is to really appreciate how our assessment informs our intervention. So we want to look at factors that might be intrinsic to the individual. For example, they may have attitudes or fears, physical, cognitive, intellectual attributes that could be barriers to access if we don't think about it and help them plan. They might have mobility challenges and need resources. They may need psychoeducation to help them understand the importance of the service for them, or to help them think through how this might benefit them, for example, through motivational interviewing, and also to understand the impact of not taking care of certain issues that might create larger problems in the future. So we need to look at those factors that are intrinsic to the individual and see what we can do to improve the fit between the individual and the environment so that they can meet their goals. There might also be factors that are intrinsic to the system. So sometimes healthcare institutions, for example, or nursing homes that focus on populations and aggregates, they're not set up to individualize plans. I recall that Professor Kivnick gave an example one time of a lady who was awakened at 5:30 in the morning for her daily bath when that was a great burden to her. And that was a function of the system kind of setting up a routine that didn't work for that individual because it was more convenient for the system. There are also factors that are intrinsic to the culture and society, and these are, of course, the kind of big macro dynamics that are at play and profoundly affect the experience of individuals. So those are things like cultural biases, preferences, policy choices that we make as a society, how we allocate resources, and prevalent attitudes. So once we think about where these factors are impacting our individual clients, that gives us a clue as to how we want to direct our efforts. If we feel that the disparities are the result of problems in the system, then that's where we direct our interventions. If we see that there are issues within the individual that we can help to moderate or impact, then that's also an important place to direct our intervention. And then, of course, we always want to be thinking about the larger cultural issues and societal issues that we can impact through our professional efforts in advocacy, lobbying, and the like. So I want to get back to focusing on our work with individual clients. And I think one way, of course, we always start this with our social work biopsychosocial assessment. And that one way that we can address disparities is to really try and identify where the disconnect is between the current client situation and their goals. I think that when we assess our client situation, we often think in terms of like what they need in order to meet their goals, but we don't often take it the next step and really think about where the barriers are between the situation that they're in now and where they would like to be, and how some of those situations we can impact and some of them we're not going to be able to impact in the short term. And to talk frankly with our clients about that and to see where that disconnect is in their thinking as well as in the context that they're living in. So another way to think about that is to zero in on where the opportunities for improvement lie. And that's a very pragmatic approach where we use our assessment to be strategic in our efforts to help our clients. We also want to be sure that we are identifying and engaging our clients' goals and preferences, and that we are using that strengths-based approach to direct our efforts. So in other words, we don't want to establish a goal that the client doesn't agree with and then wind up kind of barking up the wrong tree with our interventions in a way that doesn't serve our clients' self-directed capacity. So then we want to, of course, identify resources that exist and that might be able to be leveraged on behalf of the client to assist the situation, but that we also want to keep an eye out where there might be gaps, because these are real challenges to clients and for ourselves to deal with. So we'll be ultimately using our assessment to develop a strengths-based, individualized conceptualization of the client situation, where we are kind of formulating a hypothesis about where the disparities are originating, and then developing a plan that will address those specifically. So when we get to our planning phase, we want to specifically address the disconnect. What is in the way of the client meeting their goals? And once we've identified those, whether they're on a, kind of a more personal adaptation level or more of a organization or societal level, and very often what's happening is factors exist on all those levels simultaneously. But again, we want to address each one in turn so that we focus our intervention on the appropriate objective. So once we've achieved an understanding of the client's goals and an appreciation for what the barriers are to that, then we can start to zero in on how we will help our clients achieve those goals. And again, this often requires work on multiple levels. And one way to think about that is what changes or adaptations are helpful in the client, Would more information assist them? Would some kind of skills training assist them? Are there expectations that could be modulated in order to improve um, kind of the goodness of fit between the client and their objectives? The same thing with the physical environment. What can we change or adapt so that it improves access or mobility or functioning? What changes or adaptations in the social context, like key relationships, social friendships, family relationships, friendship groups, those skills groups, those kinds of things that can help the client meet their goals. And what changes or adaptations in the larger society or community are necessary, which basically is a question that sometimes we can't impact things in the kind of immediate time frame that would benefit this particular client. But as we see several clients go through the same problem, hopefully that encourages us to advocate at the larger society level through professional organizations, lobbying, writing to our legislators, working to generate new resources, etc. So really, when we're working with our individual clients, we want to attend to their immediate situation and what is possible now, which is very different from what happened in the past and also what might be possible in the future. So again, if we're thinking of this in a process-oriented approach, we're dealing with a specific time and place and situation of now and hoping to help the client move from here to a preferred state. So some key questions. What does the client have to work with? What can social work add? What adaptations in the client's context can promote improvements? In other words, how can we leverage the situation to their benefit? How do we add knowledge or skill or attitudes or empowerment to the client's situation in a way that helps them overcome disparities that might exist for them? And then to also really think actively about who else can contribute to improving the situation. Is there a service provider on the other end who can meet us halfway? Is there a family member or friend who can help as a resource for the client? What accommodations can be made in their environment to enhance their functioning and their access to their goals? This is hopefully all very familiar to you, but this is all the intervention and activity that's happening at the micro level with the client and their immediate system, but also maybe at the meso level where we're perhaps dealing with a specific service provider or a specific agency around meeting this individual client's needs and what kind of flexibilities can be identified. One of the things we've talked about too is that social work relationships that we have with our colleagues and other service providers can greatly enhance client situations. Sometimes that's a way that we leverage our knowledge and skill on behalf of our clients. And then, as I mentioned, that we would take our understanding of some of the patterns that emerge and think about what's possible in future, not just for this client, but maybe for many others like them, and to really think about our advocacy efforts and what societal changes would we recommend in order to provide greater access and justice for this population. Many times we're also engaging in education, and sometimes this is formal, like giving a presentation to a key group of stakeholders, but many times it's informal and kind of constantly sharing stories and case reports and our experiences in the field to educate others about the problems that confront our clients and the kinds of barriers that exist and how disparities are real, and really kind of helping people connect the dots and shape their understanding of the problems and situation. Also to help define the needs and solutions and moving it up from, maybe I can think of an example where maybe an individual is seen as disabled and therefore not able to, use a service, as opposed to maybe the service is like transportation or something. And then when we take that and turn it around, we define the need more in terms of more flexible and creative solutions for transporting people who have mobility impairments so that they can access the larger community. So that's shifting the need from that, or the definition of the need from a problem in the client to a more independent living model or disability rights kind of model, and looking at it as the need for more flexible transportation solutions. We also want to advocate for change for groups of populations. So, while we might be doing our best with this individual client, we can also imagine many others that are going to be confronting similar challenges in the weeks and months and years ahead. And so to advocate at the policy and resource development level, and really strongly encouraging that the systems that we work in and that those we collaborate with reduce disparities and create systems for individualized plans that meet our client needs. And also, one thing to not overlook is how case reports that are appropriately disguised to promote confidentiality, of course, can be, in essence, expert testimony, so that we witness and essentially collect anecdotes that illustrate the patterns of disparity, and also can point to the possibilities when those disparities are removed. We want to talk about independence with our clients, and this is where our strong value of promoting client independence and autonomy can come into conflict with societal values and challenges to, in fact, there are disparities that work in opposition to our clients exercising their independence. And those might be social factors, so the way that clients are able to identify choices, create access, exercise their decision making, those can be impacted negatively by disparities that exist in our society. Also, the way that physical challenges are confronted includes things like accommodations in the physical environment, making adaptations, with access to wheelchairs and maybe communication technologies that allow our clients to overcome some of the barriers in participation in society. Also, we want to think about how our clients can exercise their autonomy in the context of key relationships. And that often involves sort of an interdependence where the need for the relationships to continue and to be strong and nurturing might require that they give a little in order to get a lot, and that kind of thing. And that kind of natural interdependence that happens in relationships all the time might be something that we actually need to kind of work on and foster greater effectiveness for. Also, autonomy is an important way that independence is exercised, that where people can make their own choices, be treated with respect and dignity, where they are able to experience their self-efficacy and their ability to control their life to the highest degree that they're capable of, and to have that respected. And so these are all areas of independence where we have high values as social workers, but also I think just in our American society. And these are all areas that can be impinged upon when disparities exist and kind of work against the rights of the individual and the capacities of the individual. So what do we do to counter disparities? Well, there are a lot of things that we do as social workers. First and foremost, we provide education and information on how to use the existing system. So we share our knowledge about how systems work and the kind of gaps that might exist between the client's situation and their goals, and how they might access services and resources to improve their own situation or adapt to it. And I would really, again, reiterate that we focus on the here and now first, that we need to start somewhere, and let's start with where we are now. That oftentimes we look at the past and we look at the future and, don't think so much about what are the specific steps that are going to get us from here to there. Social workers also provide assistance leveraging the system to the client's benefit, and we do this by making phone calls, by having expert knowledge about how systems work, helping with forms, helping with anticipatory guidance, and maybe rehearsing with our clients what the next steps are and that kind of thing, providing a vision for how the future can be different. We also provide counseling to assist clients' adaptation and promote self-efficacy. This is a really important issue that we need to not overlook, that our ability to assist our clients in understanding their situation, including the disparities that they might face, and to plan realistically for that, and perhaps to manage some of the strong emotions that might come up with those realizations, is a really important activity that social workers do in the context of our work. Part of how we operate is to endeavor to improve the fit between the client and their goals, or to kind of close the gap between where they're experiencing disparities and where they have needs. But that requires sometimes helping the client make realistic adjustments to what is possible in the here and now. This is not the same as not advocating for the ultimate goal of autonomy, self-direction, efficacy, etc. But I think it is a very pragmatic step in helping clients see where they are right now. And then, of course, as social workers, our activities at the systems level to advocate for change are other ways that we work to counter disparities. This cartoon was actually in the newspaper just today, and I thought it was very timely in light of the article that we read on managing age discrimination. And here's this gentleman who's looking at his, 5-year-old kid, and already experiencing the impact of those kind of preferences for youth that are pretty prevalent in our society. So just to break this down into a couple of examples lifted out of the literature for this session, there are some examples of how disparities exist in all of the populations that we seek to serve. So to give the first example, age discrimination. And the study that we read looked at how individuals who were getting older and were confronting joblessness for pretty protracted periods of time, how they managed. And the focus of the article was on what the individuals did to cope and manage. And I think, again, this is often where our social work interventions zero in on how do we help this individual deal with their situation, make improvements where they can, and also adjust. The examples that they gave were, first of all, they just sort of accepted the reality that it was out there, and some of it was beyond their powers to change at the largest levels. And so they're focused on what they could do, which included counteractions. So they prepared themselves, they took additional training, they changed resumes, that kind of thing, in order to present themselves in the most positive light. They also changed their expectations. So while they might have been looking for a full-time job at the salary that they enjoyed before, maybe they're looking now at the possibility of a part-time job or a lower salary, or even a different line of work. So, going through a process of adjusting their expectations over time. And then also working on, quote, improving their appearances. So things like dyeing hair or dressing in a more youthful manner, talking in a way that reflected more youthful insights. That those were strategies that were also adopted as a way to kind of manage the impact of age discrimination. So in the case of a person with intellectual disabilities and access to health care, the example was given of a woman who was presenting for a checkup, and because of a number of factors, arrived late for the appointment, plus the physician was running late for the scheduled 15-minute appointment. So there were those kinds of um, barriers right away. And then also the person had a new caregiver with her who did not know her health history, and then the physician was unable to communicate directly with the individual because of communication challenges posed by her cerebral palsy and intellectual disability. So you can see kind of a perfect storm of poor communication, the client's inability to advocate for herself, the lack of information about the client's history, but also the needs that she might have from this consultation with the specialist, um, the client's fund of information about her, own healthcare needs and how preventative care, for example, might help, or how um, preparation with a list of questions for the physician or something might have been something that could be done to promote a more effective appointment. And then the interpretation of the client's experience. So who, if the person's not able to speak for themselves, who actually communicates on their behalf? What kinds of tools or technologies can be made available to assist the person in communicating their needs? For someone with intellectual disabilities, that level of interpretation might be very important. For example, a parent who understands that when their child grimaces in a certain way, that's a signal of pain, or a personal care assistant who works frequently with an individual and is able to understand their speech in a way that someone new to that person might not be able to. That kind of interpretation is often very important. And then also creating flexible systems that can accommodate people that have these special challenges or need these kinds of accommodations from them in order to deliver their service effectively. So that's an example too of where disparities can be compounded. Again, that idea of the cascade of disparities by someone who, in their living situation might get along okay, but when they need to access services, there's additional barriers that need to be planned for and dealt with. If we want to look at another example that this wasn't really reflected in our literature this week, but certainly there are issues in coaching individuals to navigate the healthcare system, people of any age. It's a whole culture in and of itself, and so what kinds of information do people need in order to be coached to use the system effectively? It's probably a very different experience if you're a person just going in to same-day surgery to get your appendix out, a planned procedure, as opposed to someone who is in a healthcare crisis and needs to use intensive care services or maybe multiple specialists and maybe over a long period of time. So to think about what are the individual's needs and how are we going to coach them to use the system effectively. And then to really think about who advocates for a sick person. So if you're unable to speak for yourself, who knows your situation well, who knows what your preferences are, who knows what you want out of your care, who can double check at the bedside for safety to make sure you're getting the proper medications, who's communicating with the doctor on behalf of that person. These are all strategies for addressing some of the disparities that easily occur in the very complicated, specialized healthcare environment that we have now. And also how do disenfranchised individuals gain access? So if you think about our earlier example of the mother who was trying to access emergency room care for her child and speaking only Spanish, what kinds of systems can we put in place so that those individuals can gain access? And again, how can the system be made flexible enough to accommodate individualized needs and most importantly to minimize suffering? And suffering in the healthcare system might be literally pain or symptoms, but it can also be the overwhelmedness of trying to access the system and to be an effective consumer, and the kind of suffering that goes on in the face of the normal operations of the healthcare system. The long waits, the high bills, those kinds of things can also be construed as sources of suffering. So just to draw a few conclusions here, disparities do exist. They occur for many different reasons and at many different levels of the client experience. Social workers tend to be on the front lines, and so we encounter these disparities with our clients, and an important part of our job is to help clients overcome disparities, and we use our knowledge and skill and resources to help them with that. Social workers observe patterns and opportunities and offer lessons learned from others. So in that way, we're kind of like a filtering point or a funnel for many different individuals' experience. And we can draw out themes and patterns and form hypotheses about why disparities might occur, both for that individual, for the more at the agency level, and then also in terms of the larger society. It is often true that our clients require multimodal interventions in order to improve their situations. So we are often simultaneously working on micro, meso, and macro levels of practice, and we are often challenged to develop intervention strategies that address all these different levels. And what's most important is to make sure that we understand which level we're working on and advocating for, and that we target our intervention so that it matches the level of practice where the need is. And then also that social work knowledge becomes a tool for our clients to use in the service of their goals. And as we help them meet their goals and overcome disparities, then we are fulfilling a lot of our objectives as practitioners in terms of creating a more just and inclusive society. And social workers do this by working as brokers, counselors, navigators, and advocates, and also assisting our clients in understanding their situation effectively so that they can make choices about how to use the situation to their best advantage.